Kateryna Zarembo is a researcher, lecturer, translator and author who has long combined academic, literary and policy work. Since August 2024, she's also served as a volunteer combat medic with the Hospitallers Medical Battalion. From 2010 to 2017, she worked at the New Europe Centre, focusing on European integration, Ukraine security and international advocacy. Her 2023 book, The Rise of Ukraine's Sun, explores civic society in eastern Ukraine. Her research interests include international relations, security policy and civic society. And I'm delighted to say we are meeting here in the context of the Lviv Media Forum, where Kateryna is one of the guest speakers, and it's an absolute honour and privilege to be able to speak to her today.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to speak to you too.
You have done an extraordinary amount, experienced an extraordinary amount. What drove you, as someone who lectures and could be thought of as an academic sort of mind, to actually go in and serve and put yourself in danger?
I think we have to follow our guts. And my gut was telling me that much as I respect and love academia and research and writing, I just think that it was not enough for me. But I would not like it to sound depreciating for the field. I mean, I think that some people who just believe it's just their thing, they should do it, but it was no longer my thing.
And when did you first get involved? Of course, this war's been going on for 11 plus years now. Is it the context of the full-scale war that really drove you?
Yes, it was. I mean, in 2022, I saw many of my colleagues drafting themselves, mobilizing, and I realized, I want to be next to the probably most noble thing you can do, defending your country.
And it's difficult, isn't it? When you look at the East, and I travelled out to Eastern Ukraine for the first time a couple of weeks ago in the kind of Pokrovsk direction, you really do get that sense that you're travelling not to sort of drop off the end of the world as medieval travellers would have thought, but you're actually travelling to the edge of freedom, because there's a point at which you can exercise certain values, such as freedom of speech, religion, and there's a point at which things change.
Yeah, I think you put it very well. I think, yes, it's where the freedom ends, but we want to, expand to get back our borders of freedom. I think it's very well put.
And there is, of course, the propagandistic myth that Eastern Ukraine is indistinguishable from Russia, that actually because people are Russian speakers there, that somehow means they're going to be indifferent as to whether they're ruled from Kiev or Moscow. What's your direct experience of living amongst people, traveling there, and of course understanding more about sort of values and culture of Eastern Ukraine that can help us to overturn this propagandistic trope?
I think to begin with, we probably should not even, repeat it live. And I'm saying this because as you mentioned, I wrote a book on civil society of Ukraine's East prior to 2014. So I wrote it about the period which preceded the Russian invasion of 2014. And basically, when we repeat this, and I purposefully do not say it out loud again, is we make it, again, sound in people's heads and minds. Whereas the reality is that the Ukraine's East has been a multinational land for centuries, especially for the last 3 centuries, for example, because it was populated by Ukrainians, Jews, it has a Greek minority, German minority, Russians as well, but they were not the majority. And what the Soviet Union first and then modern day Russia wanted to do is exactly to not believe this and not know about this. And now we just have to basically uncover this and return Ukraine's East its multifaceted identity. I think what is important to mention here in terms of hard data is that according to the only population census which was there in Soviet Russia in 1897, they measured nationalities in terms of the language. So they would ask which language you speak until they would write down the nationality. And over 60% of Ukraine's East, it was Katerynoslav gubernia then, spoke Ukrainian. This is important to know. So the language overturn which took place over the last century was of violent and purposeful nature. So I think maybe we start with this when we describe identity, and then we can.
And the emergence of civic society is something else, though, isn't it? That wasn't necessarily there in full force, or there were perhaps differences across the country in terms of developmental levels of civic society as a broad concept, and even the idea that democracy needs to be fought for, even the idea that through democracy you can gain individual and communal agency. What was the process of the development of that from, the newly declared independence in 1991 to the present?
Yeah, this is a nice question, something which I dedicated many years of research to. Overall, you have this transition period from an unfree society to free society. So once Ukraine became independent in 1991, of course, you could not have, developed civil society just overnight. And in a nutshell, I would say that Ukraine has passed a certain phases of transformation from professionalized civil society of the 90s and early 2000s, where people would establish NGOs and learn more or less how to manage them, but it was only later that people gained this sense of their own civic influence and impact, of individual impact. And I think that it is important to understand that in Ukraine people only come in groups when necessary. Well, part of civil society, I suppose. Some people, of course, remain in groups, but other people come in groups when necessary and then go back when it's less necessary. This is part of the nature of Ukraine's civil society, which is important to understand. So I think revolutions, of course, so first of 2004 and then of 2014 and full-scale invasion have been major impetus and boost for, I would say, express learning of how to be civil society, and overall the progress which Ukraine has made over this over 3 decades is amazing. If we talk about the East, then in the 90s and in the early first decade of 2000, there was various small grassroots movements of various nature, like human rights, ecology, Ukrainian kind of patriotic education, and so on and so forth. And
another topic which is interesting, and it's often something like sort of literature can be seen as sort of esoteric and not necessarily connected to politics. But here it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because even though, let's say, Ukrainian and Russian are interchangeable, especially on the front lines, there'll be a lot of communication in both languages, whatever is most efficient. How important, however, is it that people, when they're thinking about literary language, when they're thinking about authors to read, how important is it that people in the first order go to Ukrainian literature rather than, say, the canon of so-called Russian classics and so on? How connected is that to actually the resilience of Ukraine as a state, its identity, the willingness of people to actually fight to preserve Ukraine as a sovereign entity?
You're asking about the importance of literature, yeah?
And Ukrainian literature specifically.
It's fundamental. I mean, it's fundamental. When you read, and if you want, you can compare. Okay, in order to understand Ukraine, you should read Ukrainian literature, not Russian literature at all. These are two different literary canons. These are two different systems of values. And I mean, if you actually study purposefully the two, you would really see the difference. So Russian literature is a lot about, and if we take any kind of famous name like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or whomever, or even Solzhenitsyn, it's about a small person. There is this concept in Russian literature of a small person, a person who cannot do anything. And Ukrainian literature, again, if we go back into centuries, it's the opposite. It's about a person being able to do anything. When I read the novels by Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Ukrainian dissident who was able to survive the Russian concentration camps, Ivan Bagryany, they both wrote, the big novels about concentration camps, and I was thinking, okay, so Solzhenitsyn's work is about system breaking a person. It says like go along with the system, and this is the only way to survive. Whereas Bahrani's novels are about stand against the system. This is the only way to survive, you know. And I think this is some of the fundamental differences. So yes, in order to understand Ukraine, you should study Russian. In order to understand Ukraine, you should study Ukrainian language and read Ukrainian literature.
And if we go back to, say, 19th century, it becomes a little problematic, doesn't it? Whereas someone like Mikhail Gorgel, the Russified form, is an interesting blend. I mean, certainly his St. Petersburg themes are very Russian, you know, small person trapped in a large, you know, impersonal bureaucracy and these kind of trauma and humiliation. But there's also a kind of, I would say, humor and an irony and a soul there. You know, Dead Souls has a lot of soul, which in hindsight seems to be distinctly Ukrainian.
I think Gogol's heritage is controversial in the fact that he was kind of, he struggled between the two identities, I think. And this is what we can also see in his novels. But there are many other intellectuals, Ukrainian intellectuals. Let's start, of course, with Taras Shevchenko and Lesya Ukrainka, who also worked under Tsarist Russia, but their output is different. Despite the fact that, for example, Taras Shevchenko also wrote some of his texts in Russian, some of. But if you read them, then you will see less controversy. So I think Gogol's case is just special, and we should be aware of it when you read his works.
I know this is a very sort of short interview. Hopefully it'll be the precursor to another conversation. I very much hope so. Just to end out though, you have extraordinary experience of what's happening in the East. And of course, as someone on the train said yesterday, I think pikantny, I think he said, it's hotter out East. It's more difficult there. But from what you've seen, do you remain confident that Ukraine will triumph, will retain or regain its sovereign territories and emerge stronger despite the extraordinary trauma and loss of the last 11 years?
If I understood you correctly, I would probably not use the word pikantny. I think experience there is very...
This is a man from Zaporizhia, that was his terminology.
Yeah, I mean, whoever said that,
I
just think that this is very, I would say it's body rich, body rich, not, and as a combat medic, I see a lot of, I mean, medics work in the case when there is already a problem. Right? So they would support the people who are already in trouble. Yeah, they are already, we call them 300 wounded casualties. So I see this kind of losses in some respect. But overall, I would say that I mean, the brigade I work with has very high spirits. But it's not even a matter of brigade. I would say, in terms of the historical and political context, there is no other way for Ukraine to survive but to continue fighting for itself. It's important for itself, not against, not wanting something it didn't own or it is not entitled to. It's just fighting for its democracy and international law in whichever form it will be re-established. Yeah, I mean, if we accept the division and conquering by Russia and occupation of the territories, we just leave it with a closer platform to attack again. If we accept capitulation, then it's like the end of Ukraine whatsoever. So there is just no other way. So yes, I do believe it because I cannot not believe it. It's the only option we have.
And I think everyone watching this is going to be extremely grateful that there are people like you and all your colleagues who are willing to fight, not just for Ukraine, I know that's primarily why you're doing it, but providing a shield for Europe and for all our values, even if many in Europe aren't fully aware that you're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being there with us.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.